spitting out the fires of hell.
It lives to kill. The most frightening experience of your life.
Why should any phenomenon be assumed impossible? The universe begins to look more and more like a great thought than a great machine.
I didn't kill anyone. And if I didn't kill anyone, then I'm not insane.
I killed my own daughter. She had become a whore. The day after I die, I should help you find justice.
It's the goddamnedest thing I ever heard. You performed an autopsy on a patient that was still alive?
Yes, I was naked. See, now you're not due for another enema till 9 o'clock, so I think I'll relax and take a shower.
When is the last time you heard of anybody scalding to death in a shower?
That's a new one, all right.
2 freak deaths in less than 12 hours.
What about Martha Bernson's death? Or the woman who died in the shower? Your mother's nurse? And Dr. Taylor, he testified at your trial. Just what are you getting at?
He hasn't moved out of that chair all night.
Because the doctor here tells me that you have some sort of a psychic way of getting out of your body and committing murders.
Didn't you tell me that when the energy force leaves his body, he is clinically and medically dead?
This is Jared McVeigh from Island of Blood, a.k.a. Whodunit, and you're listening to The Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. You're listening to The Hysteria Continues, and welcome back. This time we're all going a little bit medium, a little bit... what did you have? Did you have a biscuit tin? What was in a biscuit tin? Old lady mediums, Doris Stokes and all that, because we are going back to 1975 and Psychic Killer. So, Erik, what colour is your aura?
Black, like my underpants.
You should be more Dayglow pink.
Yeah, well, they were Dayglow pink, but then we've been on this Skype call trying to fix issues for the last 38 minutes, and they've turned black through despair.
I think we need a psychic or someone to try and work out what's going on with the Skype gods. We need someone to raise the Skype gods to try and get us back on track. But we're back. It shows our perseverance to your entertainment, dear listener, that we are up to this god awful hour of the night. Well, actually, it's not even 9 o'clock at night, but we are recording into the night on our GMT times because with a few internet problems, but we won't let that get in the way. So Nathan, what color is your aura?
I think my aura is I'm picturing a lavender color.
Yeah, I would picture that for you as well.
I could see that.
Yeah, I just feel I'm very psychedelic.
Or I was thinking more like an old lady.
Yeah.
Oh, how dare you?
I can see, I don't know what it is, but I can picture mentally a smoke ring around your head.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what's happening right now?
I plead the fifth.
Okay. Joseph, what color would your aura be?
Why pigeonhole auras to color? By the way, that was my joke. I left in an intentional delay because we're experiencing delay issues. So.
You got me. I was about to...
I was about to say something.
Yeah, my color would be purple. Actually, purple's probably my favorite color. No one really knows that about me, but I like purple.
Well, they do now. I would say my aura would be black, but now Eric's ruined that for me, so I don't know.
Oh,
I know.
Grey.
Not grey. That's a rubbish aura, isn't it?
Yeah, well, cobwebs are grey, and you like cobwebs. Tombstones are grey.
Well, let's just leave it at that. But I was going to say, we are going back to 1975, and the reason we're talking about auras, I can remember back in the 70s when things like ESP and auras and all those kind of things were very popular. And I don't know if did you guys ever do this with any siblings or any cousins or anything? Write down, get bits of paper and put a triangle or a circle or a speed willy or something on it, and then ask them to guess what was in your hand.
A speed willy?
Do you not know? I mean, there's a joke. You know what a speed willy is, don't you?
No.
Well, a speed willy is something, maybe it's just a Bristol thing, but it's if you go past someone's car and it's a bit dirty, you draw a penis on it very quickly.
Oh, how mature.
How does this relate to triangles around someone's name?
Well, all I was saying was that back in the 70s, we used to do things like you would sit. It's a bit like, obviously, this film sits in with a canon of films like The Fury and Carrie and all those kind of films where it was very popular. It was very in vogue, really. This crystals and sitting under pyramids and believing in the Bermuda Triangle, all these kind of things. So we are talking, of course, Psychic Killer from 1975, and Erik, this was your choice, wasn't it? I mean, it's going to be interesting to discuss whether or not we actually think this is a slasher movie. I can guess that's open for a mass debate, isn't it, Erik?
It is, and I mean, I did admit at the end of the last episode that I'd need to rewatch it to try and check out its slasher credentials, but I think we can shoehorn it in. I think we're probably being more strict nowadays that we have the Patreon sideline going on, but I think there's enough slash action in Psychic Killer to justify it being a main pick. Does anyone agree?
I agree.
Okay, well, let's talk. We'll talk about that at some length, I'm sure. But before we do that, let's have a quick chat about what we've been watching recently. So, Erik, first up, how about you?
Yes, well, as I said in the last podcast, I've got my projector and my 3D Blu-ray player now already set up for multi-region viewing. So I finally got to see Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D in the new Scream Factory box set. And yeah, it was really, really good. I finally sort of mastered the art of projecting the 3D properly, because I don't think I was doing it properly before that. But for me, everything in Friday the 13th Part 3 worked, particularly the opening titles, which are amazing, because that was probably the one effect I really, really wanted to see in 3D, because I've always imagined what it would be like seeing those titles come off the screen, and they really do. They're really very impressive.
Did you astrally project it to the
very
screen?
Clever. I used all my Kirlian force to project it. In terms of the effects within the film, the eyeball pop still doesn't work for me, even when I put it into slow-mo and did freeze frame on it. It still wasn't working great. But other things like the two pitchfork murders in the barn were really good. And what else was there particularly? The vagrant guy who holds out the eyeball to the screen, that was really good. And it really felt like the eyeball was prodding you in the face. So yeah, I was really impressed with my finally catching up with Friday the 13th Part 3 after first seeing it in 1987 or so. So it's been 34 years in the making, but it didn't disappoint. Well impressed.
Excellent. Did you? I still haven't got round to sending off my replacement disc, so I don't know if I've missed a train. Did you? I suppose you wouldn't have a chance, but did you get a replacement disc?
I did get the replacement disc, yeah. So the issue with the first print of the disc was that after the Friday the 13th Part 3 credit, everything sort of moves back into the 3D space, if you know what I mean. So stuff doesn't fly off the screen, the rest of the credits, but the replacement disc it does, and it's really very, very good. So I also purchased Amityville 3D. I think it's a Spanish Blu-ray, but I wasn't expecting much from it, but it was as good for me as Friday the 13th Part 3. The effects were amazing. There's particularly the scenes of there's the real estate agent who pushes his hand out to the screen as he's sort of in his death throes. That was really, really good. Also, all out of those scenes where the paranormal investigators are prodding microphones and cameras out of the screen towards the end of the film were incredible. And just the whole film didn't have a duff 3D effect in it. I was really impressed with that. So I went back and rewatched Jaws 3D as well, which I was complaining about in the last podcast, and it worked a lot better this time around. Still a lot of issues with some of the effects in it, but it was a lot better than my first viewing. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but certainly it warranted a second viewing. So I watched those three classic 1982-83 3D movies, and it was like a dream come true, something I've wanted for a long time. But certainly Amityville 3 and Friday the 13th 3 were the pick of the bunch. They were really good.
Excellent. I knew you'd love your 3D, so I'm glad it's dreams do come true. Anything else, Erik?
Okay. The one other thing, the one sort of new one for me, but I know you guys have all seen this because we've discussed this and recently seen before, was 1BR, or as it's listed over here on Sky Cinema as Apartment 1BR, which is almost torture porn like movie where a woman moves into a apartment block and then realizes that she's accidentally inducted herself into some kind of sinister cult. I thought the film was engrossing, but I also found it incredibly depressing at the same time. I mean, as I said, it's sort of brief scenes in it are borderline torture porn, so it has kind of a Hostel and Saw type vibe in certain scenes, and I'm just kind of like over that. I'm just not into extreme horror anymore, and some of the scenes I just found a little grim, and I just found it. As I said, I found it engrossing. It entertained is probably the wrong word, but it kept me interested for the 90 minutes. But after it, I felt like that was kind of a depressing film. So it's good, I suppose, in one respect, but it's not something I would watch again. So I can't remember what you guys thought of the film.
I can remember really liking it. I thought it was. I didn't really know anything about it going into it, so it's the one, isn't it? Set in the apartment block where you have to. It seems perfect, doesn't it? Before she moves in, and then it's got a horrible secret.
Yeah.
No, I can remember really liking it. I thought it was definitely worth a look. I don't remember it being too tall. I know the bits you mean, but I thought unlike some films where. It just seems the whole point of the film is to sort of have people squirming around with torture. The whole torture porn thing of the that time around Hostel. It kind of worked in context of the story, so I don't think it's too gratuitous.
Yeah, they are. The scenes are brief, but I mean there is one very gratuitous scene involving somebody's hands being nailed to a wall, which was pretty grim because the person doesn't deserve it. It's not like it's a villainous person who has it done to them.
Well, what about, I can't remember, Joseph and Nathan, have you seen it?
I remember liking it, but admittedly it's been a while. And I remember the basics, especially when you mentioned the hand scene. I remember that really well too. And I remember the ending. I liked it a lot, but I've never had the desire to revisit it. I guess for me it was a really good one-time watch.
Fair enough. What about you, Joseph?
I still haven't seen it, so yeah, I'm not in a rush to if it's all torture party.
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, as Justin was saying, I mean, the torture porn scenes are brief, and there's only a few of them. I just find films about cults and that to be a bit depressing.
Yeah, I'm not really into that sort of kind of. I mean, I like The Wicker Man. I think that's like the gold standard, but I don't know. I'm just not much of that, into that type of film.
Okay, well, fair enough. Eric, anything else?
Nope, that was it for me.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Joseph, how about yourself?
Well, it's been a while since we last recorded, and I had planned to catch up on some movies, but honestly, I just didn't care to. We've had some really great weather, so I've been kind of spending a lot of time outdoors, trying to get in fit shape, all that jazz. So nothing for me this week, but I did get hit with some recommendations, and we'll discuss those on the next episode. Sorry.
That's okay. Nathan, how about you? Have you been out jogging and enjoying the great wilderness, or have you been inside watching movies?
Well, I just got back from vacation, which is holiday for people overseas.
Yes. Did you have a nice holiday?
And I didn't. Unfortunately, I don't really have any newly watched movies. My friend Melissa came up to visit the last few days, but we just watched stuff that we've already seen and then we love. We didn't watch anything new. I did show her Unhinged, and she liked it a lot.
Oh yeah, I didn't. Did you like that movie, Nathan? Because I don't think you talked about it.
Oh, I loved Unhinged. I thought it was really good. It's just a really entertaining thriller.
Yeah,
you got to suspend your disbelief because there's several things that the main character does or has done that makes it very easy for Russell Crowe's character to do the things he does.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it's just entertaining. I loved it. Fun stuff.
Okay, so have you finished? Is that everything, Nathan?
Yeah, I've not watched anything, so... Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, I haven't seen a huge amount either, but I did. I've started doing some new reviews for Hysteria Lives. So one of the films that I basically had queued up on YouTube for a long time, and I didn't get round to, but I'd always been intrigued, was She's Dressed to Kill, the 1979 TV movie, which always intrigued me because I remember seeing the cover, and it's got this bloody knife, or a very stylized bloody knife, and scary looking man and some models screaming. And I thought, well, that looks right up my street. And I thought, well, this is a rip-off of Dressed to Kill, the Brian De Palma movie. And in fact, actually came out 6 months before that. So I wondered if that had inspired it. But it's probably the campiest TV thriller I've ever seen in my life. It's got models being murdered, which of course is always a great trash aesthetic, as we know and love from films, everything from Horror of the Zombies to A Million, Jali. And in this, you've got some models going off to remote clifftop mansion for a fashion show and being killed off one by one. And it's in ways which are so gloriously ridiculous. Is one gets killed by nerve agent, is disguised as hairspray. So she kind of sprays her for a faucet flick and drops dead. Another one dies through cyanide-laced lip gloss. And there's various kind of murders, more conventional murders, and it's just very over the top, bitchy dialogue, completely ridiculous. Eleanor Parker playing this this over the top, over the hill fashionista, fashion designer who is just who's constantly drunk. So she's got my spirit animal, and she's just having a whale of a time. It's just it's Jessica Walter, who recently passed away, of course, was in Play Misty for Me. And all sorts of people you spot from 70s TV movies. It was just a hell of a lot of fun. So I know, Nathan, you are a fan of that one, aren't you?
Yes, I think that movie is amazing. I actually bought it from Movies for Sale. It was one of the oversized VHS boxes. I can't remember who put it out either. USA, maybe? I don't know. Don't quote me on that because I don't know. But yes, I'm a big fan of it, and I think it will be fun to cover it.
I think it would be as well. It's kind of one of those ones that is not really a slasher, but it could be a slasher if we kind of want it to be, because there's models being bumped off one by an unseen killer. I just love these. The other film I watched, actually another film I watched, which isn't a horror movie, but I was doing some research on it, and I think it was The Night They Took Miss Beautiful, which was another TV movie from 1977 by the same writer. And in this one, it's a plane full of beauty contestants get hijacked, but also one of the beauty contestants is an undercover agent working with somebody who's taking a deadly bacterial organism to a country to be defused. So they get taken over by this kind of a rebel group and taken somewhere, and then you've got all these beauty queens and these gorillas, and they have to they put on a talent show while they're being kidnapped. So it's, again, gloriously stupid. It's got Victoria Principal in it, pre-Dallas, Stella Stevens, and a whole load of more 70s TV faces. And unbelievably, it wasn't, although that sounds incredibly camp, it wasn't as camp as She's Dressed to Kill. But it's still, Phil Silvers as well in it as well. So that's another one. So all these wonderful TV movies are on YouTube, I seem to be finding. So a great rabbit hole to go down. But is that one you've seen, Nathan? Does that ring any bells?
No, I've not seen that one. No.
It is again. It is pretty stupid, but it's a lot of fun. I just love. I mean, it kind of ties into what we're talking about, a psychic killer. I think that whole 70s aesthetic of it's very different. Well, it's obviously very different from the 80s aesthetic that we know and love. But it'll be interesting to discuss that in context. So. Erik, are you ready to come back in on our psychic killer?
I sure am. Arnold Masters is a mild-mannered man who obsesses over his mother, but finds himself implicated in a murder he didn't commit and is sent to an asylum. While incarcerated, a fellow patient teaches him the techniques of astral projection, also known as the Kirlian effect, which is the ability to use his mind to control objects at will. When the real killer is found and Arnold is released, only to find that during his time in the asylum his mother has died, he vows vengeance against those responsible for setting him up and begins to use his powers to exact a bloody revenge. Yes, so as Justin said, I think on the end of the last podcast, Psychic Killer is a film that I associate with the notorious UK video label Vibco, because this was one of their slew of titles that they brought out in the early 80s, alongside the likes of The Boogeyman, Zombie Flesh Eaters, The Slayer, and even Dark Sanity, that film that sometimes comes up on the podcast. That's the film with the woman washing her hair in the bird bath. because she's in an insane asylum, obviously. But anyway, Vipco went out of business in the post-Video Nasty era, but re-emerged in the early 90s and re-released some of their early catalogue and then some new titles, titles that were new to them. And one of them was Psychic Killer. Now, I didn't buy it at the time, but I did buy some of their other stuff, like the Boogeyman, Zombie Flesh Eaters, The Beyond, and the trailer for Psychic Killer seemed to be at the top of all of them. Now, the trailer probably didn't grab me because I never sought the film out, but I was sort of familiar with from seeing the trailer sort of dozens of times. I didn't actually see it till about 2 years ago because I bought the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, which came out, and it is a pretty awesome print they've put together because it looks sparkly and brand new compared to the trailer, which I was watching, which was grainy and scratchy and full screen. So one thing I noticed about the film watching it was the slight similarity with The Exorcist 3, because in that film we have the killer who is the Gemini killer who falls into this coma style state whenever his soul leaves his body to possess the people who are out doing the murders for him. And in this one, our lead sort of falls into a state that makes him clinically dead as he sort of leaves his body to seek vengeance on those who wrongfully put him in prison and who neglected his mother while she was ill. The film as a whole is kind of an oddity because at times it's quite serious and has kind of that 70s slightly grindhousey feel, I suppose, and so 1 minute it's serious, but the next it's really quite silly and playful. The scene with the negligent nurse is quite hilarious because how on earth she manages to maintain her employment status is beyond me. It's already established early on that she failed to check up on Arnold's mother for sort of 3 or 4 days before her death. Now surely that's a sackable offence, if not a criminal offence. But she's still employed, it seems, at the hospital, and we see her taunting this elderly man who can't move. She's doing all kind of sexy moves and sexy chat with him, and she says things like, well, seeing as you aren't due another enema until 9 o'clock, I'm going to take a shower, which she does, and then proceeds to do a very slinky, sexy dance in her underwear. But obviously she's not long for this world, as she is murdered by a sentient shower. There are other funny scenes in the film as well, which are sometimes, some of them kind of flow nicely with the rest of the film. Some of them are really quite jarring. I mean, Arnold is released from prison in quite a darkly comic scene where the prison warden says, well, it's not the first time an innocent man has been wrongly accused. I hope you take this in good spirit. He's almost treating it as if they'd accidentally given him a Coke instead of a Pepsi or something, not that they'd put him in prison for 6 or 7 years or whatever the time is. Although I did enjoy that scene where he returns to his family home, which obviously hasn't been lived in for a long time, and it's covered in cobwebs and looks exactly like the Kurzweil's house. I'm sure that's what your house looks like, Justin. The main sequence, though, for me that sticks out like a sore thumb, and we heard it in that intro I cobbled together, is the scene involving the lawyer who's kind of surveying this building site that he's, I don't know, doing some legal work for us, whatever. I think he might be the head honcho on it. But he starts singing this sort of little opera song, La Donna Immobile, and he ends up being crushed by a large bit of stone that's dropped from a crane in kind of a comic slapstick moment, and it plays very much like the comedy Cops in Halloween 5 because it's accompanied by kind of silly music, and it seems quite out of place considering, I suppose, the seriousness of the rest of the film. It's a very odd scene, but I suppose it adds kind of the quirky charm to the whole film. And there's a scene in the butcher shop with Neville Brand, who makes a very brief cameo, and he's with this customer arguing about food stamps. It actually made me wonder if it inspired the famous food stamp scene in Friday the 13th Part 3. But again, it's shoehorning in humor, which is then followed by the goriest scene in the movie where Neville Brand gets minced, basically. So scenes like that do seem kind of odd and quirky because it's serious 1 minute and silly the next. But as for its slasher credentials, I think that the supernatural deaths of the victims make it kind of Final Destination-y, and maybe there's a slight Nightmare on Elm Street air to them, so that's why I'm thinking we can sort of push it into the slasher genre, because Elm Street is definitely what we would call a slasher film. I think Final Destination we've discussed. Have we covered Final Destination on the
We did
podcast?
the first one, but that's it so far.
Yeah. So we do consider that a slasher. So this is a slasher then. That's my defense of that. The thing about the Arnold character, the central character, I'm not sure if they're totally successful in making him sympathetic. I find him a bit cold and standoffish. I'm not really invested in his character, and I don't weep for him as I would for something like Carrie. But I do love the 70s aesthetic of the film. I mean, looking back at the 70s, how big are the cars? I mean, they're about 12 feet wide. How do you parallel park in one of those cars?
I love that.
I mean, are cars still like that over in the States?
No, the 70s was very notorious for having these very long cars in the States.
And really wide.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they were like tanks out on the street almost.
I know. I do think in terms of it being sort of a grindhouse film, it's very much at the commercial end because it has quite a mainstream feel in comparison to a lot of mid to low budget 70s American movies. But that's probably why I'm kind of drawn to it. I mean, I don't think it's a perfect film by any means, but I do think there's enough in there for me to enjoy. I find I'm entertained from start to finish. I'm never bored by it, but it might be just a bit too quirky for it to be considered any kind of classic. But I do like the way that it's the end shot sort of insinuates that a possible sequel would involve a killer cat. But speaking of killer cats, Justin, you live in a house full of killer cats. What did you think of Psychic Killer?
Well, I'm not sure. I can see lots of cats where they're all sleeping at the moment. They've got a belly full of Bix. I don't think any of them are psychic killers that I'm aware of, although one of them is a lizard killer, unfortunately. But none of us are lizards, and none of us are David Icke, I don't think so. Or actually, David Icke isn't a lizard, is he? Anyway, I've been watching...
No, he thinks other people are lizards, though.
So apologies, David Icke, he's a mad nutter. So Psychic Killer, it's one I think I saw quite a few years ago, and when I was kind of trying to devour the Vipco films, as Erik said, it's when they came out, and Vipco had this amazing name. It was so fondly remembered by a certain age group of people who grew up in the video nasties. They put out these incredible covers and these amazing videotapes of these films, and when they kind of re-emerged in the 90s, they put out these terrible cut films with really cheap covers which only had the title on them in white type. And I think Psychic Killer was one of them. So when I watched it, I was kind of a bit disappointed, really, because I didn't realize at the time it was a PG-rated horror movie, which seems like an oxymoron, but I think at the time there were a number of kind of PG-rated horror movies. It was kind of slightly different to the rating is now. I don't know if that... I mean, I know it's obviously before your time, Joseph and Nathan, but PG-rated horror movies, there were quite a few of them, weren't there, in the 70s?
Yeah, it was a very common thing because the rating system was a little different there. Where they didn't have PG-13, and if something wasn't quite as gory, it wasn't gory enough to get some, like a higher rating, they would just, lump it in with the PG and just say, hey, warn your children, that there's some thematic elements here. So I mean,
what was the next step up from PG? Was it R?
Yeah, just went from PG to R. Mm-hmm.
So that was a huge leap, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I quite like a lot of the 70s grindhouse movies, they sometimes have that kind of TV movie aesthetic, perhaps. And so this feels in some ways a little bit like a TV movie in some, and also I think that's partly because actually a number of the prominent actors in this were kind of TV. I think the main cop, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I know he was big in TV in the 70s. But I think again that a lot of that was just how a lot of those grindhouse movies felt. I mean, like a film like Don't Answer the Phone, those kind of movies, or it's a Hollywood slasher, Hollywood Strangler versus Skid Row slasher. Those kind of movies, everything was kind of felt quite flat and 70s, which is kind of ironic given that it was the days of disco. So you would have thought everything would be disco balls and kind of glitter, but in fact, actually everything was beige And I love it. So, I love the 70s, and it's got this kind of weird mixture of this kind of grindhouse aesthetic and this kind of TV movie aesthetic. You mentioned, is it Laura Wilcox, I think, is the nurse who was in the kind of very grindhouse film, was it Kiss Me Deadly? The necrophilia film, which came out a few years before this, as that nurse in a striptease, which was very kind of grindhouse things, but it was very coy with the nudity in this, that you didn't really see any nudity, or it was very brief. And the gore, it was brief, as a Neville Brand bit in the butcher shop. Although I didn't really get what was his crime.
I'm not sure either on that one.
He wasn't very nice.
But didn't he just go and buy? I mean, obviously, being a vegan, I wasn't particularly hot on him as a butcher. But didn't he just go and buy some meat from him, and then he kills him?
Doesn't he overcharge for his stuff though?
That sort of felt to me like they added that in to kind of pad out the running time.
Yeah, very possibly, because there was because Della Reese, who was the customer, like they said, the scene with Neville Brand and Della Reese where they're arguing over food stamps in the butchers, it's kind of it was quite funny, but it didn't feel like it kind of, all the other murders seemed to sort of make sense. But I suppose maybe it was a suggestion that he was going more and more mad. But I enjoyed it. It's kind of very much of its time. I think for me, if it had gone more the exploitation route, more the horror route, and gone a little bit gorier and a bit more sexploitation and more that 70s grindhouse, rather than playing it safe with a PG rating, then it may have stood out a little bit more for me. Having said that, I enjoyed it. And I think, you're right around, the whole slasher movie thing. It's kind of essentially a slasher movie, but in the way, like you said, Final Destination also reminds me of what Uli Lummel went on to do with the Boogeyman. The kind of the murders in that. Again, it's not the killer is in that is kind of obviously kind of a ghost behind a mirror or whatever of kind of a spirit, and this is this astral projection, which is very gimmicky. But it works in a thing, and I like the ending where he kind of you've got this kind of quite grim ending where the policeman knows the only way he can stop the killer is by burning him alive because it's right in thinking, isn't he, when he's astral projecting, he's clinically dead, isn't he? They managed to get this coroner over to say that to sign him off as dead, and then rush him to a kind of funeral home and burn him alive, which is quite a grim ending. But yeah, I liked it. I liked the kind of that kind of strange, that real 70s romance between the doctor and the cop, and they kind of have one glass of wine and jump straight into bed, which is very 70s. But yeah, overall it's great. I must admit I wasn't that hot on the main character, Jim Hutton, who I don't know, because it was kind of strange. He kind of felt like it was like a mixture of something like the characters and something like Bad Ronald or Willard or something, those kind of early 70s weirdo anti-heroes, I kind of guess. So he kind of, I didn't feel a massive amount of sympathy for him, even though he kept on hallucinating his mother being tossed off a cliff and things like that. It didn't quite work for me, but overall I enjoyed it. I think it was a blast, mid-70s blast of PG rated horror, which it was a lot of fun. So I'm glad you chose it, Erik. So thank you.
Excellent. Joseph.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this for a very long time, and I remembered next to nothing about it going into it for this episode. First off, we sort of fall into the story as it's already in progress. There's no real lead up to the stuff in the mental institution, so the opening is sort of jarring. But that's not, you don't need to worry about that, because we get this huge exposition dump not 5 minutes into the movie that kind of brings us up to speed on what's going on. And the shocking coincidence that this wronged man, this Arnold character, he's going to get, his avenue of vengeance via this other inmate who knows astral projection. And I guess he kind of passes on this gift to Arnold just before he dies. But he dies in this this scene with the worst mannequin effects.
I love that scene.
Since To All a Good Night. I mean, they're so flimsy, and I laughed out loud at that. Yeah, and this is not even 10 minutes into this batshit crazy film. But suffice it to say, I really, really enjoyed Psychic Killer. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's a slasher film or even a proto-slasher film, but it borrows tropes from the time period, you know, from films we label proto-slashers. And, you know, it's essentially a body count film. So I think we're justified in covering it. I love the scene with the nurse, as we've talked about. I'm guessing she's this sort of Black Dahlia type character because she seems to get off on teasing her patients at their most vulnerable rather than, you know, helping them out. She gets this really 70s dance sequence in front of this elderly carer. He's kind of gasping for his last breath, and it's just so bonkers. She's just stripping down and dancing around in front of him. He's just like, you know, groaning for his life. The death scenes, they're cut weird. Like the scene with the lawyer getting crushed by the stone sign. We see the stone up close just before it crushes the guy. And because I assume they couldn't afford to actually create those horrific effects needed for that death scene, they create this this kind of sense of false urgency with doing like, they do like slide cuts over like blank screens of the same color as the object, and it gives the death scenes this really bizarre effect. And they do that, and they do that for every death scene in some manner, like the where the guy's in the car and the cops chasing him, the way they cut it there, or the way she's in the shower, they'll use like a color palette to kind of create this false sense of movement. It's very bizarre. It almost looks like a home videotape the way it's shot. But yeah, the lead guy, Arnold, I didn't know who to root for in this movie, to be honest, because this guy, you know, he's wronged, but you should feel some sympathy for him, but he's just so creepy and cold that like you guys have said, it's hard to sympathize with him, you know. And meanwhile, the cops on the case, they're so loud that you just eventually want them to go away. And I guess that kind of leaves those who wronged the main guy. But I think their sins, they're not really shown, but they're except in like kind of these over the top cartoony mental flashes from Arnold. So we don't really get a sense, you know, that they really deserve what's coming to them. So there's really no one left to root for at the end of the film. But, you know, having said that, it all sort of works as this, you know, this exposition heavy train wreck waiting to happen. I mean, thumbs up high from me, Eric. I loved it. It's just a goofy film. It's got nothing meaningful to say, and it's capped with a really startling conclusion that I suppose it's supposed to make you feel a certain way, but for me, it was just another kind of crazy turn with all these crazy people. And I enjoyed spending my 90 minutes with these crazy people. So yeah, wonderful pick, Eric. But I did have a question before you pass it on to Nathan. The bit with the amulet at the end, the doctor kind of panics and he's like, did he have the amulet on him? He didn't have the amulet on him. And he runs back into the house to get the amulet. I mean, what is the deal with the amulet exactly? Because I was under the impression that the guy, the guy that died in the mental institution that gave him the powers to do this, I was just under the impression that he mentally passed it on. So what did the amulet have to do with anything?
Well, I assumed that the amulet had to be worn by the person doing the astral projection, which made me query that end scene where he's not wearing it, and yet he's astrally projected, so I'm not sure. Nathan?
I'd never seen this before, so this was a first-time watch for me, and I really liked it. I get what you guys are saying about the main character, but in all honesty, these people he's killing, I mean, they ain't anything special. So I was fine with them, you know, meeting their demise because they're mean. Now, I feel bad for the loved ones. Don't get me wrong. But these people were very mean. Like the nurse, she's going to be like, oh, yeah, but my uniform, it's shrinking. And it's just, she's like teasing this poor bedridden, like elderly man. And she's such a terrible person. And Neville Brand, I loved his death scene in the butcher shop. It totally felt like a Final Destination kind of death, in all honesty. And yeah, I liked I liked the comedy bits that went along with the horror. I will admit that, especially like the construction site death where the big stone is dropped, the way they like play that scene, it almost is like it would fit better in like a spoof of horror movies, because it doesn't, I don't know, the way they play it is not how they play the rest of the movie. And it's definitely played for laughs when this guy's killed. But then you kind of think about, obviously the ending, that wasn't played for laughs. But no, I really liked the movie a whole lot. I agree with what you guys have said about it. I was pretty excited because I don't know if I would have watched this any other way. And now I got to watch it because it was one of your picks. And to make up for that, Erik, I am going to pick something like totally unheard of for a future episode, since you introduced me to this.
Oh, you shouldn't, Nathan. Oh, it's just too much.
There were a lot of these. I was talking earlier about how in the 70s there was kind of this obsession with these astral projection and things like that, because there are quite a few. There's a couple of other movies come to mind. One is Patrick.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of when I was watching this.
And also, have you ever seen the Medusa Touch with Richard Burton and Lee Remick, where he's kind of like he's in bed and he's in a coma, but he's causing all these disasters, and Lee Remick's trying to stop him. So there was a whole slew of these kind of movies where you had these kind of psychic things, and of course a lot of the the TV movies as well, like ESP and kind of witchcraft. The Initiation of Sarah is not quite the same, but where is it Kay Lenz manages to fling Morgan Fairchild across into a pond just using her mind. So there was a lot of that going on in the 70s, wasn't there? There was a lot, and obviously Carrie as well, with the whole ESP and kind of not astral projection and stuff. But it was very hot in the 70s. And then when we get into backgrounds, there was a bit of a rush of people trying to, or the makers of this movie really wanted to get it out as quickly as possible because they thought astral horror was going to be the next big thing, which I don't think it was.
Well, I mean, Carrie and the Fury did big business.
Yeah, although this, if we're getting into background now, I'll just say that my understanding is this was made in 1974, and it was obviously going to be released under a different title beforehand. So I think the 70s kind of astral projection and sort of ESP horror it took a little while to catch on, didn't it? It was a bit of a trendsetter in that way.
So will we move on to background?
Yeah.
Nathan, do you have any background for us?
No.
Joseph, do you have any background for us?
Not a whole lot from me beyond jumping back to the past VHS releases, which you guys talked about. But it was released in the United States to VHS in 1986 on the Embassy label. It was released in the United Kingdom, as you said, on the Vipco label in 1980. And then they released it again in 1992 in a cult classic Frightener clamshell release. But yeah, that's all the background I have for this week. Sorry.
Joseph, or Justin, do you want to go ahead with what you have then?
Well, I've got a few bits here. It was filmed in this 1974. It didn't actually get a release in the UK, and I presumably got a cinema release, kind of a low-key cinema release, but not until the summer of 1978. Jim Hutton, who's the father of Timothy Hutton, he was previously he did mostly kind of comedy roles, which again, it kind of, although he doesn't really play this comedically, he said at the time that he said Hollywood would never let me do anything serious. Now I even get to do a kind of Dorian Gray finish. All the sins my aura has committed settle on my face at the end, and that's something you haven't mentioned, but there is that kind of Dorian Gray.
He wants Dorian Gray to finish on his face. Is that what you said?
well, who wouldn't? The originally it was called when it was filmed under the title The Carillion Force. That was based on I was looking this up because again I remember in the 70s that whole thing of the aura, and there was this massive thing at the time in the 70s about these kind of people go to parties and say I can see your aura or whatever. Not that I did in the 70s because I'd have been about 5, but there was all these things. I don't know if you've seen the photos of people's hands and they're glowing, all that kind of thing. It was apparently from from a kind of studies that are done by a Russian scientific couple in the first part of the 20th century, I believe, that they thought that it was like a new energy source, so that every living thing had this aura. And you had different auras, good auras, bad auras, or whatever. So there was, again, it was this thing that really took off in the 70s. The film apparently it was rushed in production and took 120 days from the first shot until the answer print. Now, I didn't know what an answer print was. Do you know what an answer print is?
Oh, I hear about it when I read about film making books and stuff, but I'm not sure. Is that like a rough cut or something, is it?
Well, I'd never heard of that term before, so I looked it up, and it says an answer print is the first version of a given motion picture that is printed to film after colour correction on an interpositive. It is also the first version of the movie printed to film with the sound properly synced to the picture. So apparently that was rushed into production, was very quick, and Mardi Rustam, who is produced this with his brother Mohammed Rustam, I presume it may be his father, but he had come from Iraq in the 50s or so. And he went on to produce Death Trap with Neville Brand the year after, which another great Vipco release. And of course, the ultimate classic of the early 80s, Evils of the Night. So we can thank him for that. So he said that when he wanted to rush this through, he called it an aura horror movie. And said he wanted to get it into theatres as quickly as possible because he was sure that there was going to be a massive boom of aura-based horror movies, which didn't quite come to pass. But Julie Adams, who plays the Doctor in this, was probably most famous for being the woman menaced by the creature from the Black Lagoon. And she was the ex-wife of the director Ray Danton, who he was an actor who'd been in lots of TV. He went on to do things like Knots Landing and stuff after this. And he directed a kind of a film that I've not seen, but it's got Robert Quarry from the Count Yorga movies called Death Master, about hippies facing off against a vampire, I think. Have any of you guys seen Death Master from 1971?
No.
So just a couple of other bits, and then I don't want to steal all your thunder. But actually, I'll tell you what, Erik, tell us what you've got. And I've got some, just a few clips from contemporary reviews of the movie.
Okay, I don't have much that you haven't mentioned, but I do know the original title of the script was I Am a Demon. Then it was changed to The Curlian Effect. And actually, if you pick up the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray, that's the title that's on the print of the film they're showing is The Curlian Effect. The scene where Jim Hutton receives his jail friend's belongings, that includes a picture of a girl, and that picture is of Natalie Cole, the singer, the late singer, I should say, and daughter of Nat King Cole. Graydon Clark is the brains behind the film, really. He wrote it, and he was set to direct the film, but the investors overruled him because they wanted Ray Danton. I'm not sure why they wanted Ray Danton in particular, but they did. So Graydon Clark did a compromise with them and asked them if he could. The producers promised him a directing gig in the future, but they also gave him an acting role in this. So he plays the cop who is in the car that goes out of control and falls off the cliff. That's Graydon Clark, of course, the director of Without Warning and Uninvited and Wacko and so many sort of great low-budget 80s movies. What else do I have here? Yes, you mentioned about Julie Adams. Apparently, its re-release on Vipco in 1992 was cut by about 9 seconds to remove scenes of blood-stained boobies in the shower scene. But then they reissued it again in 2000 with that awful cover that you were talking about, Justin, and that was the complete version. It played on a couple of double bills in the UK. One was with Dirty Harry, and the other one was with Ruggero Deodato's film Cannibal, which is also known as Jungle Holocaust or The Last Cannibal World. That's an odd... I mean, I can kind of see why it would pair with Dirty Harry because of the cop plot going on in Psychic Killer, but to put it up against Cannibal is it's a bit of a strange one, I think. It was distributed in the UK by Miracle Films in 1978. Now, Miracle's film's boss is a chap called Michael Myers, who was responsible for the UK release of Assault on Precinct 13, and because he made such a success of that film, John Carpenter named the killer in Halloween after him. So let's let's see, what else do we have here? The budget was around $250,000, which is pretty decent, I suppose, for the time. It was screened from all major studios in 1975. None of them were interested in picking it up, but eventually Avco Embassy released it in the US. Aldo Ray, of course, is in the cast. He was in a film we covered recently, Terror Night, in it for about 10 seconds, like most of the star names in that film. Dark Sanity he's in also. Again, another mention for Dark Sanity. Human Experiments, lots and lots of movies he's been in.
He's also in your dreams, I'm assuming.
Sometimes he is. He's also in Don't Go Near the Park. Yes, he is sometimes in my dreams. He has a body for sin. Yeah, sorry, I'm just... Oh, and here's one final interesting little background thing I found, was that the lead actor Jim Hutton, to help him cry during the emotional scene where he grieves over his mother, he used a bottle of poppers to bring tears to his eyes. I'm assuming he put the bottle of poppers up to his eyes to get that effect.
What are poppers over there?
Amyl nitrate, whatever you call it.
I mean, what is the purpose of those?
Oh, right. Well, homosexual gentlemen enjoy using poppers
it's the
to
same
help
thing.
loosen certain muscles.
Yeah, okay. Same thing over here then.
Interesting.
Just wanted to be clear on that, by the way.
You know the English comedian Adam Buxton, don't you, Justin? He told a story on the radio once where he found, when he was very young, he found a bottle of poppers in an alleyway and he thought it was a magic potion because it had a lightning bolt on it.
Wow.
Well, anyway, enough about poppers. Let's get back to Psychic Killer.
Yeah. Well, I was going to I've got a few sort of mentions in the press from the time it was released. But one of the things they're talking about, strange double bills. I mean, I think there obviously were very strange double bills in the United States as well. But one of my favourite strange double bills was The Final Terror, the Rachel Ward slasher movie, and I think it was paired with something called like Mud Bath Hellcats about female topless mud wrestling. So that was a double bill that I remember seeing the poster of on eBay once, and I thought, wow, what a double bill! That is so bizarre.
Joseph would like that double bill. The rest of us maybe less so.
Maybe. So so the just a couple of things here. So Steve Hogner in the Austin American Statesman in January 27, 1976. Said that the occult, parapsychology are hot items at the moment, and what with Bermuda Triangles, astral projections, deja vu, and ESP, all timely, if trite, party openers. There's money to be trapped here, especially with the recent upsurge of books, television specials, and magazine articles on the subject. Now the movies are starting to cash in on the trend. Essentially, what is wrong here, though, can be pinpointed to direction and bad acting in general. Barbara Klein in the New Jersey The News said, a showing of Psychic Killer should be preceded by a warning that the movie may induce vomiting and cause nightmares. Instead, the powers that be have labelled it PG, inviting young children and everyone else to see some of the most grotesque murders in movie history. The last thing I'll just mention here was that Richard Eder in the New York Times news service said he wondered if Psychic Killer could be a midnight movie, because this is around the time, wasn't it, where midnight movies are starting to come into the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I think it was 75 as well, wasn't it? But it was the movies were finding an audience with as midnight movies, and he was wondering whether or not Psychic Killer could be one of them. He said it takes a decent level of concentration to achieve that rare and profitable product. The movie that is so thoroughly and triumphantly awful that wave after wave of college students will return to sit through midnight showings in a rising haze of disconnection and other fumes, which made me think of Nathan for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Justin.
So, well, that was the background I have. Anything else to add? No. I guess we should find out what people who are dear listeners thought of it. Joseph, do you have that to hand?
Yeah, out of 33 votes, 55% of those listeners enjoyed Psychic Killer, 45% were neutral, and no one appeared to dislike this film. So that's good. Our listener of the week is Carl Leto, and he writes, that musical sequence at the construction site is one of the greatest moments in B-movie history. So I think that's the opposite opinion of what we thought. Actually, I kind of like that sequence, but yeah, I get it.
I don't mind it. It's just a bit weird in the middle of the kind of a semi-serious movie.
Yeah, definitely out of place. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by searching The Hysteria Continues. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and nearly all podcatchers. If you enjoy the show and are willing and able to make a monetary contribution, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per episode and gain access to exclusive content not found anywhere else, guys. And we also have a Redbubble shop for merchandise. And our email address is thehysteriacontinues@gmail.com.
Excellent. I just want to give a little shout out to Rob Saunders, whose podcast Deaf Nerve. He's very kindly had me on talking about John Carpenter's Halloween. And hopefully Rob will join us on this show as a guest at some point in the near future. So that was a fun chat. And Deaf Nerve.
Well, speaking of friends of the show, while I have a minute, a friend of our show, Emily Dunlap, has her own podcast called Gang Me With a Knife. And it's just your typical friends discussing slasher movies, which is pretty much exactly what I look for.
And don't we all?
Yes.
So some recommendations out there for you. So yeah, lots of good shows coming out. So
it's my joke of the week. It's so great and fantastic.
So what did the actor who plays the lieutenant in Psychic Killer say when he met Julie Andrews? I'm Aldo Ray, me. Do re mi. Do re mi. From The Sound of Music with Julie Andrews.
That was clever. I liked it.
I haven't seen The Sound of Music.
But you don't get the joke? Do re mi. Al do re mi. Do re mi fa sol la ti do.
The music thing. Okay.
But isn't it Julie Adams?
No, it's not. It's Julie Andrews.
No, in Psychic Killer.
Yes, but because the punchline is Aldo Re Mi, he has to meet Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music.
Oh, and he never has. So we're off to auspicious start here on your joke, Erik.
Yeah.
So, do we have any feedback this time?
I do.
Oh, okay.
My feedback says, hey guys, out of interest, what are the slasher movies for which you have the opposite opinion of than most other people? I.e. the ones you really love, which most others seem to hate, or the ones you hate, which most others seem to love. Personally, I loved Club Dread, whilst many slasher aficionados seem to be quite lukewarm on it, and I've always thought that the original Halloween was actually pretty dull and not particularly well shot or acted in comparison to the Rob Zombie version.
Somebody get the smelling salts for Justin.
What about you guys? And that's from Simon.Logan.
I think Simon.Logan
says, P.S. just kidding about Halloween.
Well, I was going to say, there was somebody talking about the need for putting someone in an asylum.
Honestly, this and I mean, just about any movie that I love. There's a lot of movies I love that seem to be hated. So,
yep.
I love a lot of stuff. I can't think of anything that I hate, though. That I mean, like I joke about Silent Rage. I don't hate it. I just am not a big fan of it. So I'm guessing that one because I think a lot of people really do enjoy that one, and I'm just lukewarm on it at best.
I go a little more mainstream. A lot of the Friday the 13th fans hate A New Beginning because it's not Jason, but that's probably my favorite of the series because it's just so goddamn entertaining.
I've said this before on the podcast, and it'll be no surprise to you guys, but probably Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, it's not a film I hate. I think the first half is really good. I don't like the second half that much. So I think I'm the only person in the world who thinks that way about the film. So that's probably my one. In terms of films that I really love that everyone else hates, again, it'd be mainstream. I mean, I really liked, this is not a slasher film, but things like Alien Covenant, which got slated in the press, I really like. But I'm trying to think of a slasher example. I suppose some of those Friday the 13th sequels again, or Halloween 5. There we go. There's one. I really enjoy Halloween 5, and I think it's far superior to Halloween 4.
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, for me, I think it's one that we've done a commentary for recently with the I'll Always Know. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. because I've always adored that movie. I've always thought it was so much fun and was like a real early 80s horror movie. There was glorious ridiculousness in it that people hated at the time, and they still kind of hate. And I'm hoping that people might, if they revisit it, might watch it with a slightly different frame of mind now.
And how can they watch it at the moment, Justin?
On the 88 box set that we did the commentaries for. I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, and we did pass on I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, but I don't think that's a controversial decision. As far as films that everyone loves that I just I don't hate them, but I must admit everything at the Nightmare on Elm Street past Part 2 leaves me a bit cold. Even the girl with the giant hair that turns into a cockroach. I just find, I don't know what it is. I just I loved Nightmare on Elm Street, and I loved the zaniness of Part 2. But I don't know, I'd never find myself revisiting them unless we're covering them for the podcast. You know, when it comes to the big franchises, I'd much rather watch Halloween sequels, or mostly the Friday the 13th sequels. I just find the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels just don't really do it for me. So I guess that means I think talking about an obscure movie. Of course, I think am I right in thinking we're covering one of the best known slasher movies ever released in the early 1980s next time?
Yeah, it's my pick. This is actually a listener pick, and this was chosen a while back, and we're just now getting around to it. So. This is an Australian movie called Early Frost from 1982. It's quite rare. And I guess a little disclaimer, some of our feedback recently has been questioning some of these kind of lower tier choices. And for us, to start, this is a listener pick. So I do need to discuss this. And second, I think we can all agree that we kind of like shining a light on some of these films that were kind of lost to the sands of time. So I think now would be kind of, as we're kind of in this, I guess kind of on a roll with these kind of lower tier picks, I might as well go ahead and get this one, on the show so we can talk about it. Plus, we do have some very big titles coming out very soon, I promise. So, but yeah, we're covering Early Frost from 1982. It's an Australian, I guess it's a slasher film. It's also on YouTube if you want to watch it. So there you go.
Yeah, looking forward to covering that one. It's an early 80s slasher that we haven't covered. And like Joe said, I think if we powered, we've been going 10 years and we still have some like the bigger titles to cover. And I think, otherwise we power for all the big titles, and then, it's good to keep us on our toes, I think, isn't it?
I would agree with that.
So, and also it's, at the end of the day, I thought for me, and as like Joseph said, it's actually looking at some of these older films that are less known is, for me, in a lot of ways, I'd much rather talk about those than just retread old ground that people have talked about some of the bigger films ad nauseum forever, and there's nothing new to add to them. And although it's fun for us to do, to cover some of those big movies, actually getting our teeth into some of these lesser seen movies, whether or not they're great movies or not, there's always some interesting stories to be had. So,
I not to toot our own horns, but maybe us talking about this film, Early Frost, will get it some, the exposure that it deserves. Or maybe we'll all hate it and we'll agree that it should stay buried. Who knows? Just tune into the episode to find out.
Yes, I don't think anyone else has seen it yet, have we?
I haven't yet, not yet.
No.
I've covered some of the more obscure New Zealand and Australian slashers from the early 80s. There's like Mr. Wrong, Symphony of Terror, if that's the right word. But there's quite a few Australian slasher movies, or kind of associated or not quite slasher movies, like The Day After Halloween, films like that we've kind of covered, or we've certainly looked at in the past. So it'd be interesting to see this one, because obviously there was a big Australian exploitation horror, sci-fi, grindhouse kind of filmography, and a lot of filmmakers making those kind of movies. Obviously Mad Max is probably the biggest, best known of those movies, but there was a lot of great movies being made, and it might be worth, if you've not seen it, there's a documentary, I think, is it Ozploitation?
Not Quite Hollywood, it's called. Yeah.
But we're also going to be covering on Patreon the feel-good movie of the summer, Lake Mungo, another Australian classic. So that's coming up as well. And also we're coming to the end of the 1970s very soon. I think this month we're going to be into 1978. So it'll be interesting to see what other non-Halloween, i.e. John Carpenter, horror movies that we choose for that year. So
and you know, the 70s have been a lot more, I guess, fun than I anticipated. I've really enjoyed covering a lot of these films that I've kind of forgotten about. It's kind of shined a new light on them.
Well, you must be looking forward to when we go back to 1920s now, then.
Oh, yeah. I think it's widely accepted.
Charleston
I think it's widely
murders.
accepted that we're going to the 90s next. So
yes. So it's funny to think 90s. It's still weird. It kind of feels like 90s. It doesn't quite now feel like 90s is modern time by any stretch, but for a long time it kind of did. So, yeah. Well, what are we playing out with, Erik?
We're playing out with Do Re Mi from The Sound of Music, but not performed by Julie Andrews. This is the version by Sparks.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So, well, all we have to say is say goodbye to the good people, and we'll catch you next time as we go down under for an early frost. So say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.